The rain had been falling over Brooklyn for 3 hours straight. The kind of October rain that soaked through jackets and chilled you to the bone. Sarah Collins watched the droplets race down the diner's front window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. The neon sign of Rosie's Diner buzzed intermittently above, casting pink and blue shadows across the wet pavement of the nearly empty street. "Sarah, honey, you heading out?" Rose's growly voice cut through her thoughts. The 72-year-old owner was wiping down the counter with the same faded yellow cloth she'd used for the past decade. Sarah glanced at the clock above the kitchen pass rough. 10:47 p.m. "Yeah, just finishing up the last table." She gestured toward booth 7 where a tired-looking truck driver was nursing his third coffee refill. "Go on, I'll handle him," Rosie said, waving her off. "You've been on your feet since 2. That's a double shift, kid." Sarah managed a small smile. "Thanks, Rosie. I'll just take out the trash on my way." "Always the responsible one," Rosie muttered. But there was affection in her tone. "Don't forget your umbrella this time." Sarah retrieved her worn canvas jacket from the hook near the kitchen and grabbed the 2 trash bags sitting by the back door. The umbrella sat right where she'd left it that morning. She picked it up, then set it back down. The walk to her truck was only 20 feet. She'd survived worse. The kitchen's fluorescent lights flickered as she pushed through the back door into the alley. The rain hit her immediately, cold and insistent. Sarah hefted the trash bags and moved quickly toward the dumpsters at the far end of the narrow passage between Rosie's Diner and the abandoned textile factory next door. Brooklyn at night had a particular quality, a mix of distant sirens, the hum of traffic from the expressway, and the constant rhythm of the city that never quite slept. Sarah had lived here her whole 26 years. She knew which streets to avoid, which shortcuts to take, how to keep her head down and her keys between her fingers. She tossed the first bag into the dumpster, the metallic clang echoing off the brick walls. As she lifted the second bag, a sound made her freeze. Crying. Not just any crying. The desperate hiccuping wail of an infant. Sarah's heart seized. She dropped the trash bag, its contents spilling forgotten at her feet. The sound came from behind the larger dumpster, deeper in the shadows where the alley deadened ended. "Hello." Her voice came out uncertain, swallowed by the rain. "Is someone there?" The crying intensified, now clearly 2 different voices. 2 babies. Sarah's feet moved before her mind fully processed what she was doing. She rounded the dumpster, her eyes struggling to adjust to the darkness. The narrow beam of the security light from the diner's back door barely reached this far. Then she saw them. 2 infant car seats sat on the wet asphalt, sheltered partially by a fire escape above. The babies inside, they couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 months old, were crying, their small faces red and scrunched with distress. But it was the man beside them that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. He was slumped against the brick wall, one hand gripping the handle of the nearest car seat with white-knuckled desperation. Even in the dim light, Sarah could see the dark stains spreading across his left shoulder, mixing with the rain that plastered his dark hair to his forehead. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed, dropping to her knees beside him. The puddles soaked through her jeans instantly, but she barely noticed. Sir, can you hear me?" The man's eyes fluttered open, dark eyes almost black in the shadows, filled with pain and something else. Fear, not for himself, Sarah realized, but for the crying infants beside him. "Please," his voice was barely above a whisper, heavily accented. "Italian, maybe. Please don't. Hospital. They'll find." His head lolled to the side, consciousness slipping. Sarah's hands shook as she pressed them against his shoulder, feeling the warm wetness seep between her fingers. She'd seen injuries before. 2 years of medical school before she dropped out had taught her enough to know this was serious. The wound on his shoulder was still bleeding, though not as heavily as it must have been initially. But his skin was cold, too cold, and his breathing was shallow. "I need to call 911, Sarah said, more to herself than to him. She fumbled for her phone with bloodied fingers. His hand shot out with surprising strength, gripping her wrist, his eyes locked onto hers with fierce intensity. "No police, no hospital. They'll the children. You need medical attention," Sarah insisted, but her voice wavered. Something in his desperation gave her pause. "Please." The word came out as barely more than a breath. "Please," Sarah's mind raced. Every rational thought screamed at her to call for help, to do the right thing, the legal thing. But she looked at the two babies, still crying in their car seats, and then back at this man who was barely clinging to consciousness, yet still held on to them with everything he had left. She thought of her father bleeding out in a twisted car wreck 3 years ago while she held his hand and waited for ambulances that came too late. The truck's passenger door squealed as she yanked it open. She secured one car seat in the back, then the other, her fingers fumbling with the seat belts. The babies had quieted to whimpers, their wide eyes watching her with that peculiar awareness infants sometimes have. "It's okay," Sarah murmured to them, though she had no idea if that was true. "It's going to be okay." The man had slid down the side of the truck by the time she returned to him. Sarah's heart hammered as she helped him into the passenger seat. His head fell back against the headrest. His breathing labored. "Stay with me," Sarah said firmly, slamming the door and racing around to the driver's side. The engine coughed twice before turning over. Sarah's hands white-knuckled the steering wheel as she pulled away from the diner, her eyes darting between the road and the man beside her. His name tag, she could see it now in the dim glow of the dashboard, read simply, D. Romano. The suit, even ruined, was clearly expensive. The watch on his wrist probably cost more than Sarah made in 6 months. His shoes were Italian leather. What had she gotten herself into? The drive to her apartment in Queens usually took 30 minutes. Sarah made it in 18, running 2 red lights and pushing her truck to speeds that made the frame rattle. She kept talking the whole way, partly to keep him conscious and partly to keep herself from panicking. "I'm Sarah, by the way. Sarah Collins. I live alone. Well, I guess not anymore. At least for tonight. My apartment's small, but it's clean. I have some medical supplies. I used to be in med school. Did I mention that? 2 years at NYU before I dropped out. My parents died. Car accident. And I couldn't. Anyway, I remember enough. I thank God. I hope I remember enough." The man, Romano, made a sound that might have been acknowledgement. In the back seat, one of the twins started crying again. A tired, frightened sound that made Sarah's chest ache. "Almost there," she promised them all. Almost there. Her apartment building was a tired 4-story walk-up in Etoria, the kind of place where everyone minded their own business, and the landlord only fixed things when they became fire hazards. Sarah parked as close to the entrance as possible and sat for a moment, her hands still gripping the wheel, reality crashing over her. She had just brought a wounded stranger and 2 babies to her home. She hadn't called the police. She had no idea what had happened to him, who he was running from, or why he was so desperate to avoid hospitals. Romano's hand touched her arm, making her jump. His eyes were open, clearer now, despite the pain etched in every line of his face. "Thank you," he said simply. Those 2 words, spoken with such genuine gratitude, steadied something in Sarah. She nodded. "Let's get you inside." Getting him up 3 flights of stairs was a nightmare. Romano could barely stand, let alone climb. Sarah half carried, half dragged him, pausing every few steps to let him breathe. Martinez from 2B opened her door at the commotion, took one look at them, and closed it again without a word. Sarah had never been more grateful for her neighbor's indifference. By the time they reached her apartment door, Sarah was shaking with exhaustion. She fumbled with her keys, finally got the door open, and guided Romano straight to her small couch. He collapsed onto it with a sound that was part relief, part pain. Sarah ran back down for the babies, taking the stairs 2 at a time, despite her burning legs. The twins were miraculously quiet now, their eyes drooping with exhaustion. Sarah grabbed both car seats and made the climb again, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Inside her apartment, she set the babies down carefully and locked the door, sliding the deadbolt and chain into place. For a moment, she just stood there breathing hard, looking at the scene before her. Small living room with its second-hand furniture and collection of paperback books now contained a severely injured man bleeding on her couch and 2 infant twins in car seats on her floor. The absurdity of it hit her all at once, and she had to suppress a hysterical laugh. "Okay," Sarah said out loud, forcing herself into action. "Okay, medical supplies first." She kept a first aid kit under the bathroom sink, a well-stocked one, a remnant from her medical school days that she'd never been able to throw away. Sarah grabbed it along with clean towels, rubbing alcohol, and every bandage she had. Back in the living room, already had his eyes closed, his breathing shallow. Sarah knelt beside the couch and carefully peeled back his jacket. The shirt underneath was soaked through. She grabbed scissors from the first aid kit and cut away the fabric, revealing the wound. The injury on his shoulder was deep, but mercifully appeared to be a through and through. The projectile had entered from the front and exited cleanly through the back. Sarah had seen diagrams of such injuries in her trauma unit rotation. If there was no major artery damage, and the fact that he was still alive suggested there wasn't, the main concerns were infection and continued loss of fluids. "This is going to hurt," Sarah warned. Romano's eyes snapped open. He gripped the couch cushion as she cleaned the wound. His jaw clenched, but he didn't cry out. She worked as efficiently as she could, cleaning both entry and exit wounds, applying antibiotic ointment, and wrapping his shoulder in layers of clean gauze. The bandages were stark white against his olive skin, but they were holding, no fresh bleeding seeping through. Sarah sat back on her heels, examining her handiwork. "I'm not a doctor," she said quietly. "This needs real medical attention." "I know," he whispered. "But thank you. Who are you?" "My name is Dante Romano. And these," he gestured weakly toward the babies, "are my children. Luca and Gianna. They're 8 months old. Where's their mother?" His face closed off, the pain in his eyes deeper than any physical wound. "She died 6 months ago. Cancer." The raw grief in his voice made Sarah's chest tighten. "I'm sorry. I was taking them to safety when we were ambushed. Someone I trusted sold me out. They came for me, but I got away with the children. Barely." He struggled to sit up more, wincing. "I need you to understand, Miss Collins. I'm not a good man. I do things that would horrify you. But those babies are innocent. They're everything good I have left of Isabella. And there are people who would hurt them to get to me." The implications of what he was saying settled over Sarah like a cold fog. The expensive suit, the desperation to avoid hospitals, the ambush. He was an organized crime. The Mafia, probably. And now she was harboring him. One of the babies, Luca, started fussing. Sarah moved to him automatically, lifting him from his car seat. He was warm and solid in her arms, his dark eyes so much like his father's. "He needs to eat," Sarah said, surprising herself with how natural it sounded. "They both do. There's formula in the bag, Romano," Dante said. "And diapers. Everything you need." Sarah found herself settling into the unexpected routine. Warming bottles, feeding babies, changing diapers. Dante dozed intermittently, his body fighting infection and blood loss. When both twins were fed and settled, Sarah made herself a sandwich and ate standing at the kitchen counter, too wired to sit. She was cleaning up when she heard it. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow and deliberate, stopping at each apartment. Dante was suddenly alert, his entire body tense. "Turn off the lights," he whispered. Sarah moved quickly, flipping switches. The apartment plunged into darkness, only the glow from the street lamps outside providing any illumination. The footsteps stopped outside her door. Sarah's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. She stood in the middle of the apartment, equidistant from Dante and the twins, unsure what to do. 3 sharp raps against the door. Dante shook his head minutely. "Don't answer." Another knock. Then a voice, casual. "Building maintenance, checking the radiators." It was 9 p.m. on a Saturday. No building maintenance worked these hours, especially not in her neglected apartment building. Sarah held her breath. The twins miraculously stayed quiet. The door knob rattled. Someone was testing it, seeing if it was locked. Sarah thanked every guardian angel she had that she'd engaged both the deadbolt and chain. More footsteps. A second voice, lower. "Wrong apartment." "You sure?" "I'm sure." "Let's go." The footsteps retreated. Sarah waited, counting to 100 before she dared to move. She crept to the window, careful to stay hidden behind the curtain, and looked down at the street below. 2 men emerged from the building. Both wore dark clothes. Both moved with the confident stride of people who weren't afraid of anything. They climbed into a black SUV parked across the street and drove away. Sarah turned to find Dante attempting to sit up, his face white with pain and effort. "They were looking for me," he said. "How did they find this building?" "They didn't. They're canvassing the neighborhood, checking buildings near where I disappeared. They'll work their way outward from that alley until they find something." Dante managed to get himself more upright, breathing hard from the effort. "We can't stay here. You can barely move. How are you planning to leave?" "I don't have a choice. If they come back, We don't answer the door again. They have no reason to suspect this specific apartment. I'm not on anyone's radar. Both of them wearing wedding rings. Sarah turned the photo over, written in elegant script. Dante, Isabella, and our miracles, 3 months to go. Isabella, the name he'd called out in his fever. Sarah looked at the babies, understanding settling over her like a heavy coat. These were their children, and Isabella wasn't here. She tucked the photo back into the wallet and returned to her spot on the floor. The rain had finally stopped. Through her window, she could see the first hints of dawn lightening the sky over Queens. Sarah pulled her knees to her chest and watched over her unexpected charges. Dante Romano, she had his name now, who was running from something terrible enough to risk dying in an alley rather than go to a hospital. And Gianna and Luca, 2 innocent babies caught in whatever storm their father was facing. I'll keep them safe, Sarah promised the sleeping room. Whatever this is, whoever you are, I'll keep them safe. Dante's hand twitched in his sleep, and somewhere in his fevered unconsciousness, he seemed to hear his breathing steadied slightly, the lines of pain on his face easing just a fraction. As dawn broke over New York City, Sarah Collins sat in her small apartment and wondered if she'd just saved a life or ruined her own. The twins slept on, unaware of the weight of their small existence, of the mysteries surrounding their father, of the danger that had driven them all into the rain-soaked alley behind Rosie's diner. Sarah thought about calling in sick to work. She thought about all the questions this would raise. She thought about the jacket hanging by her door, the one with Dante's gun in the pocket. She'd found it while going through his things, a cold reminder that this man was dangerous in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. But mostly she thought about the way he'd held on to those car seats, even while losing consciousness. The way he'd whispered, "My children," with such fierce love. The way his eyes had pleaded with her for help, not for himself, but for them. And she thought about her own parents and all the ways life could change in an instant. And how sometimes the right choice was the one that made no sense at all. "I hope you're worth it, Dante Romano," Sarah whispered, finally allowing her eyes to close. "For their sake, I really hope you're worth it." The city hummed outside her window, indifferent to the small drama unfolding in one unremarkable apartment. Somewhere out there, people were looking for Dante Romano. Somewhere out there, danger was circling. But in that moment, in that quiet apartment, as morning arrived, there was only the soft breathing of 2 babies, the fevered sleep of a wounded man, and one exhausted waitress who had chosen compassion over safety and had no idea where that choice would lead. Sarah's last thought before sleep claimed her was a memory from medical school, something one of her professors had said during their ethics course. The Hippocratic Oath says, "First, do no harm." But sometimes doing no harm means taking a risk, making a choice that might be wrong because the alternative is definitely worse. She hadn't understood it then. She understood it now. Sarah woke to the sound of crying, not the desperate wails from the night before, but the insistent, hungry cries of babies who knew it was morning and wanted breakfast. Pale November sunlight filtered through her apartment's thin curtains, and for one blissful moment, she forgot everything that had happened. Then her neck protested the awkward angle she'd slept in against the wall, and reality came flooding back. She pushed herself up, every muscle in her body screaming. The clock on the wall read 7:23 a.m. She'd slept maybe 3 hours, and it felt like 3 minutes. Luca was the louder of the 2, his face scrunched in red. Gianna whimpered beside him, building up to a full cry. Sarah stumbled over to them, her body moving on autopilot. Okay, I hear you," she murmured, lifting Luca first. He was warm and solid in her arms, his crying tapering off slightly at the contact. "I know, buddy. I know you're hungry." She glanced toward the couch. Dante Romano lay exactly as she'd left him, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths. The fever seemed to have broken. His face had more color than it had in the early morning hours, though he was still pale beneath his olive complexion. Sarah managed to warm bottles with one hand while holding Luca against her shoulder with the other. The apartment was cold. She'd forgotten to adjust the thermostat before everything happened. She made a mental note to turn up the heat once she had both babies fed. Gianna went first this time. Sarah settled on the floor with her back against the couch, cradling the baby girl while Luca waited in his car seat, his cries more insistent. "Your turn's coming, I promise," Sarah told him. She was halfway through feeding Luca when Dante stirred. His movement was subtle at first, a shift of his head, a flexing of his fingers. Then his eyes opened, unfocused and confused. Sarah watched him blink several times, his gaze traveling across the unfamiliar ceiling, the strange walls before finally landing on her. Their eyes met, and Sarah saw the exact moment full consciousness returned to him. His entire body tensed, and his hand moved, searching for something. The jacket. The weapon. It's on the table, Sarah said quietly, not wanting to startle him further. Your gun. I found it when I was checking your pockets for ID. Dante relaxed marginally, though his eyes remained wary. Where am I? My apartment. Queens. You've been here about 8 hours. How do you feel? Like I got shot, he said dryly, then looked at the babies. They're okay. They're fine. Fed, changed, and clearly very fond of you. He smiled, she said, a real smile that transformed his entire face. They're good judges of character. Coffee, Sarah offered, moving to the kitchen area. Please, she made a pot, the routine soothing in its familiarity. While it brewed, she checked on the twins, both still sleeping, their small faces peaceful. Luca had his fist near his mouth. Gianna's hand curled around the edge of her blanket. They'll wake up hungry in about 20 minutes, Dante said like clockwork. I should feed them before I leave. I can manage. Can you really? Because you could barely sit up yesterday. I've been doing this for 8 months. I'll manage. With 2 good arms. With one arm barely functional and a healing shoulder injury. Sarah poured 2 cups of coffee, bringing one to him. Let me help before I go. The word please seemed to disarm him. Dante nodded, accepting the coffee with his good hand. Thank you. They drank in silence for a few minutes, the apartment slowly lightening with the approaching dawn. Sarah could hear her neighbors starting their days. Martinez's television turning on, footsteps from the apartment above. What time do you need to be at work? Dante asked. But I should leave by 6:30 to catch the bus. Sarah checked her phone, which gives us about 45 minutes. As if on cue, Luca started fussing. Sarah moved immediately, lifting him gently. Good morning, troublemaker, she murmured, checking his diaper. Let's get you changed and fed. Yeah, she'd gotten better at this. The diaper change was quick, efficient. Luca watched her with his dark eyes, so like his father's. And Sarah found herself smiling despite everything. You're a natural, Dante observed, watching her warm the bottles. I'm learning. Sarah settled into the armchair with Luca, offering him the bottle. He latched on eagerly, his small hands gripping it. There's a difference. Gianna awoke next, and Dante attempted to lift her with his good arm. Sarah saw the pain flash across his face, quickly suppressed. Let me, Sarah said. Finish your coffee. I'll feed her too. Sarah, Dante, please. It's faster this way, and I need to leave soon. She met his eyes. Let me help. He relented, leaning back against the cushions. Sarah could see the frustration in every line of his body. A man used to being capable, now forced to accept assistance. Feeding both twins took coordination. Sarah was still developing, but she managed. Luca finished first, and she switched him to her shoulder for burping while Gianna continued eating. The domestic scene felt surreal. 3 days ago, Sarah's biggest concern had been paying her electric bill on time. There are 4 bottles already prepared in the bag, Sarah said as she burped. Luca, you just need to warm them. Feed them every 3 to 4 hours. If they seem fussier than usual, they might be teething. There are rings you can refrigerate in the freezer. I know, Dante said quietly. But thank you. Sarah got both babies changed and settled, then gathered her things. Keys, phone, wallet. At the door, she paused, turning back to look at the scene. Dante on her couch, 2 babies in their car seats nearby. All of them dependent on her silence, her discretion, her ability to act normal. I'll be back by 3, Sarah said. My shift ends at 2:30, but I'll stop at the store for supplies. We need more diapers, formula, and actual food. What do you want? Whatever you think is appropriate. There's cash in my wallet. I have money, Sarah? Dante's voice was firm. Use my money, please. She wanted to argue, but didn't have time. Stay away from the windows. Don't answer the door. If something happens, nothing will happen. We'll be here when you return. Sarah wanted to believe him. She left the apartment, locking all 3 locks behind her, and stood in the hallway for a moment, steadying herself. Then she descended the stairs and stepped out into the cold November morning. The bus ride to Brooklyn felt eternal. Sarah kept her head down, avoiding eye contact, trying not to think about the men from last night or the fact that she was now actively lying to everyone she knew. When her phone buzzed with a text from her friend Marissa, "Coffee this week." Sarah stared at it for a long moment before typing back, "Crazy busy with work." Soon, though, another lie. They were piling up. Rosie's diner looked exactly as it always did. Neon sign buzzing. Windows steamed from the breakfast rush inside. Sarah tied her apron on in the back room, checked her reflection one more time, and pushed through the kitchen doors with a smile she didn't feel. "Sarah, you're alive," Rosie called from behind the counter. "Feeling better." "Much better, thanks." The lie came easily now. "Just needed rest." "Good, because we're slammed. Table 3 needs refills, and Table 7's been waiting 10 minutes for their order." Sarah fell into the rhythm of work. Pouring coffee, taking orders, delivering plates, smiling at customers. The familiar routine should have been comforting, but instead she felt like she was playing a part in a play, watching herself from outside her own body. During her break, Sarah sat in the back alley, not near the dumpsters where she'd found Dante, but close enough that she kept glancing that direction, half expecting to see blood still staining the pavement. But 3 days of rain had washed everything away. The intimacy of it struck her suddenly. This forced domesticity. This unexpected partnership. "Sarah," Dante said softly. "Come sit." She hesitated, then moved to the armchair, curling her legs under her. Dante had shifted to a more comfortable position, his shoulder clearly bothering him less than before. "I need to tell you something," he said, "about the night you found me." Sarah's stomach tightened. The people who came after me, they weren't random enemies. It was an ambush planned by someone in my inner circle. Dante's voice was controlled, but Sarah could hear the anger underneath. "Someone I trusted gave away my location, my route, everything." "Do you know who?" "I have suspicions, but until I can confirm them, I can't contact anyone in my organization." "Which means we're more isolated than I initially thought." "How long until you can confirm?" Dante met her eyes. "Which means we might be here longer than a few days. And I need you to understand what that means. The risk you're taking, the danger you're in. More time, more risk, more lies to maintain." She should have been angry. Instead, she felt oddly calm. "I understand," Sarah said simply. "Because once they realize I'm alive, once they start looking seriously, they will find connections. They'll question everyone who was near that alley. They'll Dante. I understand. And I'm still here." He stared at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "I've been asking myself that for 3 days." Sarah smiled slightly. "I think it's because for the first time since my parents died, I feel like I'm doing something that matters, something bigger than just surviving. This could get you hurt or worse." "I know." "Then you're either very brave or very foolish." "Probably both." Sarah stood, moving to the window. She peeked through the curtain at the street below. "That black SUV. Is it back?" Dante tensed immediately. 2 buildings down. "It's been sitting there for about 10 minutes. Dante tried to stand, and Sarah immediately moved to stop him. "Don't stay down. I'll watch." She positioned herself where she could see without being seen. The SUV's engine was running, exhaust visible in the cold air. No one got out, but she could see shadows moving inside. "At least 2 people. They're just sitting there," Sarah reported quietly. "Not moving. They're watching the building." Dante's voice was tight, seeing who comes and goes. "Should we?" "No, we do nothing. We act normal. If you go to work tomorrow like usual, if nothing changes in your routine, they have no reason to suspect this apartment." Sarah's heart hammered. "And if they decide to search anyway, then we deal with it." The SUV sat there for another 20 minutes before finally pulling away. Sarah watched it disappear around the corner, then closed the curtain completely. "They're gone," she said. For now. Dante had managed to sit more upright despite her protests. "Sarah, you should know if they come here, if they find me. You need to act like you didn't know, like I forced you to help me." "I'm not doing that. It's the only way to keep you safe." I said no. Sarah's voice was firm. "We're in this together. I'm not throwing you under to save myself. That's exactly what you should do." "Well, I won't." Sarah moved closer, her frustration boiling over. "Stop trying to protect me by pushing me away. Stop acting like I don't get to make my own choices about my own safety. I'm a grown woman, Dante, and I decided to help you. That means all of it. The risk, the danger, everything." They stared at each other, both breathing hard. The tension in the room had shifted into something else. Something electric and dangerous. "You're impossible," Dante said finally. "Right back at you." Despite everything, the danger, the fear, the absurdity of their situation, Sarah found herself fighting a smile. Dante seemed to be having the same problem, the corners of his mouth twitching. "We're quite a pair," he said. "A waitress and a mob boss. It's like a bad movie." Isabella used to love bad movies. She'd make me watch them with her, insisting they were so bad they're good. Dante's expression softened at the memory. I complained every time, but I'd have watched anything if it meant seeing her smile. "You loved her very much." Dante looked at his sleeping children. "She gave me everything. Love, family, hope that I could be better than what I was born into. And then she was gone, and I was left trying to figure out how to be everything she was for these two." Sarah sat on the arm of the couch, closer to Dante than she'd been since that first night. "You're doing better than you think. Those babies are loved and cared for. That's what matters. With your help, I couldn't have done this without you. Would have found a way. You're stubborn enough," says the woman who won't let me protect her by taking the blame if we're caught. They were close now. Close enough that Sarah could see the flecks of gold in Dante's dark eyes, the faint scar on his jaw, the weariness that went deeper than physical injury. And Dante was looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Sarah," he said softly. "Don't." Sarah stood abruptly, moving away. "Whatever you're about to say, don't. You don't know what I was going to say. I can guess. And it's a bad idea." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself. "You're vulnerable, injured, grateful for help. I'm lonely and looking for purpose." The improvement was visible, though subtle. "Coffee," Sarah offered, moving to the kitchen area. "Please," she made a pot, the routine soothing in its familiarity. While it brewed, she checked on the twins, both still sleeping, their small faces peaceful. Luca had his fist near his mouth. Gianna's hand curled around the edge of her blanket. "They'll wake up hungry in about 20 minutes, Dante said like clockwork. "I should feed them before I leave." "I can manage." "Can you really? Because you could barely sit up yesterday." "I've been doing this for 8 months. I'll manage. With 2 good arms." With one arm barely functional and a healing shoulder injury. Sarah poured 2 cups of coffee, bringing one to him. "Let me help before I go." The word please seemed to disarm him. Dante nodded, accepting the coffee with his good hand. "Thank you." They drank in silence for a few minutes, the apartment slowly lightening with the approaching dawn. Sarah could hear her neighbors starting their days. Martinez's television turning on, footsteps from the apartment above. "What time do you need to be at work?" Dante asked. "But I should leave by 6:30 to catch the bus." Sarah checked her phone, which gives us about 45 minutes. As if on cue, Lucas started fussing. Sarah moved immediately, lifting him gently. "Good morning, troublemaker," she murmured, checking his diaper. "Let's get you changed and fed." Yeah, she'd gotten better at this. The diaper change was quick, efficient. Luca watched her with his dark eyes, so like his father's. And Sarah found herself smiling despite everything. "You're a natural," Dante observed, watching her warm the bottles. "I'm learning." Sarah settled into the armchair with Luca, offering him the bottle. He latched on eagerly, his small hands gripping it. "There's a difference." Gianna awoke next, and Dante attempted to lift her with his good arm. Sarah saw the pain flash across his face, quickly suppressed. "Let me," Sarah said. "Finish your coffee. I'll feed her, too." "Sarah, Dante, please. It's faster this way, and I need to leave soon." She met his eyes. "Let me help." He relented, leaning back against the cushions. Sarah could see the frustration in every line of his body. A man used to being capable, now forced to accept assistance. Feeding both twins took coordination. Sarah was still developing, but she managed. Luca finished first, and she switched him to her shoulder for burping while Gianna continued eating. The domestic scene felt surreal. 3 days ago, Sarah's biggest concern had been paying her electric bill on time. "There are 4 bottles already prepared in the bag," Sarah said as she burped. "Luca especially. He hates being alone." Sarah picked up the baby, cradling him close. He settled immediately, his cries fading to hiccups. She swayed gently, humming without thinking, some melody her mother used to sing. When she looked up, Dante was watching her again with that unreadable expression. "Nothing. Just thank you. You've already thanked me. I'll probably thank you 100 more times before this is over." Sarah wanted to ask when over would be, but she was afraid of the answer. The evening settled into routine. Sarah fed the twins again, changed them, got them ready for sleep. Dante dozed intermittently, his body still fighting to recover. Sarah made herself a sandwich and ate standing up at the kitchen counter, too wired to sit. She was cleaning up when she heard it. A sound from the hallway outside her door. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, stopping at each apartment. She looked at Dante, who was suddenly alert, his entire body tense. "Turn off the lights," he whispered. Sarah moved quickly, flipping switches. The apartment plunged into darkness. Only the glow from the street lamps outside providing any illumination. The footsteps stopped outside her door. Sarah's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. She stood in the middle of the apartment, equidistant from Dante and the twins. Unsure what to do. A knock. 3 sharp raps against the door. Dante shook his head minutely. "Don't answer." Another knock. Then a voice. Casual. "Building maintenance, checking the radiators." It was 9 p.m. on a Saturday. No building maintenance worked these hours, especially not in her neglected apartment building. Sarah held her breath. The twins miraculously stayed quiet. The doorknob rattled. Someone was testing it, seeing if it was locked. Sarah thanked every guardian angel she had that she'd engaged both the deadbolt and chain. More footsteps. A second voice lower. "Wrong apartment." "You sure?" "I'm sure." "Let's go." The footsteps retreated. Sarah waited, counting to 100 before she dared to move. She crept to the window, careful to stay hidden behind the curtain, and looked down at the street below. 2 men emerged from the building. Both wore dark clothes. Both moved with the confident stride of people who weren't afraid of anything. They climbed into a black SUV parked across the street and drove away. Sarah turned to find Dante attempting to sit up, his face white with pain and effort. "They were looking for me," he said. "How did they find this building?" "They didn't. They're canvassing the neighborhood, checking buildings near where I disappeared. They'll work their way outward from that alley until they find something." Dante managed to get himself more upright, breathing hard from the effort. "We can't stay here. You can barely move. How are you planning to leave?" "I don't have a choice. If they come back, we don't answer the door again. They have no reason to suspect this specific apartment. I'm not on anyone's radar." But in apartment 3C, there was only the sound of breathing, the soft presence of sleeping babies, and 2 hearts beating in careful synchronization, whether they wanted to admit it or not. 2 weeks passed in careful routine. Dante healed steadily, his shoulder regaining strength. Sarah continued working at Rosie's, maintaining normally while her heart remained in apartment 3C with the man and babies who changed everything. Late one evening, Dante's phone finally rang. Rico, his most trusted second in command. "Boss, we found the traitor. It's handled. You're safe now." Dante exhaled relief he'd been holding for weeks. "Arrangements ready when you are. Safe house in Connecticut. Clean identities for transition." Sarah overheard from the kitchen, her stomach dropping. This was it. The moment she'd known was coming. That night, after the twins slept, Dante found Sarah staring out the window. "I have to leave tomorrow," he said quietly. "I know." Sarah's voice was steady despite her breaking heart. "Come with us." She turned, shocked. "Come with us. Help me raise them. Be part of our lives." Dante moved closer. "These past weeks, I haven't felt this alive since Isabella. The twins need you. I need you." "Dante, I can't just why not? What's keeping you here? Dead-end job, student debt, or maybe—" He touched her face gently. "Maybe you're scared of wanting something real." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "This is insane, I know, but the best things usually are." She looked at the sleeping twins, then back at Dante. Her parents had taught her that love meant taking risks, that playing it safe wasn't really living. "Okay," Sarah whispered. "Okay, yes." Dante kissed her then, soft, promising, full of hope for an unlikely future. Sarah pushed the stroller through their Connecticut neighborhood. Gianna and Luca babbling happily. Dante walked beside her, his arm around her waist. The past finally loosening its grip. She'd re-enrolled in medical school online. He'd stepped back from active leadership, consulting remotely while focusing on family. It wasn't perfect. Danger still lingered at the edges. But they were building something real. A family forged in impossible circumstances. "No regrets?" Dante asked, watching her smile at his children. Sarah thought of that rainy night in Brooklyn. The choice that changed everything. Not a single one. Some love stories began in darkness, but they could still find their way to light. 6 months into their new life in Connecticut, Sarah had settled into a rhythm she never could have imagined. The colonial house Dante had chosen sat on 3 acres of wooded land, far enough from the main road to provide privacy, but close enough to the small town center that Sarah could walk to her online medical school testing site when needed. The twins had grown from helpless infants into curious toddlers who filled the house with laughter and chaos in equal measure. Luca had inherited his father's stubborn streak and his late mother's infectious smile. He was the explorer of the two, constantly getting into places he shouldn't, pulling books from shelves, and trying to climb furniture with the fearless determination of someone who had never learned that the world could be dangerous. Gianna was more cautious, more observant, content to sit with Sarah and watch her older brother's adventures with the knowing expression of someone far too wise for her 18 months. The transition hadn't been without challenges. Those first few weeks, Sarah had questioned her decision a dozen times a day. She'd given up everything she'd known for a man she'd met under impossible circumstances, for children who weren't biologically hers, for a life that existed in the margins of legality. There were moments, usually late at night, when both twins were teething and crying and Dante was away handling business she couldn't ask about, when the weight of her choices felt overwhelming. But there were other moments too. Mornings when she woke to find Luca had somehow escaped his crib and crawled into bed between her and Dante, his small warm body radiating trust and contentment. Afternoons when Gianna fell asleep in her arms while Sarah studied, the baby's breath soft against her neck. Evenings when Dante returned from meetings and his entire demeanor softened the moment he walked through the door, the dangerous man disappearing and leaving only a father who wanted nothing more than to hear about his children's day. Sarah's medical school progress had been slower than she'd hoped, but steadier than she'd feared. The online program allowed her flexibility, but it still required discipline and focus that was sometimes hard to maintain with 2 active toddlers. Dante had hired a part-time nanny, Maria, an older woman from the Dominican Republic whose grandmother had raised 12 children and who treated Luca and Gianna like her own grandchildren. Maria came 3 mornings a week, giving Sarah uninterrupted study time and giving the twins someone who spoiled them with homemade cookies and songs in Spanish. The business calls still came at all hours. Sarah had learned to recognize the different tones, the various levels of urgency. There were routine check-ins that Dante handled from his home office, speaking in rapid Italian that Sarah was slowly beginning to understand. There were strategy sessions that required video conferences with men whose faces she never saw, but whose voices she came to recognize. And there were crisis calls that sent Dante out of the house for hours or sometimes days, leaving Sarah with instructions she never questioned and phone numbers she hoped she'd never need to use. The closest call had come in March, when spring was just beginning to touch the Connecticut hills. Sarah had been in the kitchen preparing lunch when she noticed the black sedan that had been parked across from their driveway for the past 20 minutes. The driver wasn't getting out, wasn't making any calls, just sitting and watching. Something in her chest went cold, and she immediately called Dante's secure line. He answered on the first ring, his voice sharp with immediate attention. "What's wrong?" "There's a car," Sarah said quietly, moving away from the windows. "Black sedan, Connecticut plates. Driver's been watching the house for 20 minutes. Are the twins with you?" "They're napping upstairs. Maria left an hour ago. Go to the safe room. Take the babies. Don't come out until you hear from me directly." The safe room was something Dante had shown her during their first week in the house, a reinforced space behind a hidden panel in the master bedroom's walk-in closet. It was stocked with supplies, had its own ventilation system, and could hold the 4 of them for up to 72 hours if necessary. Sarah had hoped they'd never need to use it. She moved quickly and quietly, gathering the sleeping twins and carrying them upstairs. Lucas stirred but didn't wake as she settled him on the small couch in the safe room. Gianna opened her eyes briefly, seemed to sense something was wrong, but accepted Sarah's whispered reassurances and drifted back to sleep. Sarah engaged the locks and settled in to wait. 47 minutes later, her phone buzzed with a text from Dante. "All clear. False alarm. Rival family doing surveillance, but they've been handled. Come out when you're ready." Sarah found him in the kitchen, pouring himself 3 fingers of whiskey despite the fact that it was barely past noon. His shirt was different from the one he'd been wearing when he left, and there was a small cut on his knuckles that hadn't been there before. Are they? Sarah began, then stopped. She'd learned not to ask certain questions. They won't be a problem anymore, Dante said simply. He drained half the whiskey, then set the glass down and looked at her. This is the life, Sarah. This is what I can offer you. Safety, but never security. Love, but always with the knowledge that it could be taken away. Sarah moved to him, taking his hands in hers, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was still tight with whatever he'd had to do to protect their family. I knew what I was choosing, she said softly. I'm not afraid. You should be, he said, but his arms came around her anyway, pulling her close. You should be terrified. But she wasn't. Or maybe she was, but the fear had become so much a part of her daily reality that it felt normal now. She was afraid every time Dante left the house for business. She was afraid every time an unknown number called their landline. She was afraid when strangers lingered too long in the grocery store checkout line, or when cars followed the same route she took to pick up medical supplies. But she was also alive in ways she'd never been before. She was building something that mattered, raising children who would grow up knowing they were loved unconditionally, studying to become the doctor she'd always dreamed of being. The spring turned to summer, and Sarah passed her first set of comprehensive exams with scores that placed her in the top 10% of her online cohort. Dante surprised her by having flowers delivered from a florist in New York, 24 white roses with a card that simply said, "Proud of you. Always." The twins had started walking in earnest, which meant the house was never quiet and never safe. Luca had discovered he could open cabinet doors, leading to an afternoon when Sarah found him sitting on the kitchen floor surrounded by pots and pans, banging out a rhythm that would have made a jazz drummer proud. It was in July that Rico called with news that would change everything again. Sarah was in the backyard, watching the twins play in their sandbox while she reviewed notes on cardiac pharmacology, when Dante's phone rang. She could tell from his voice that this wasn't routine business. "Boss," Rico's voice was tight with urgency. "We found him. Giovanni Torino. He's been hiding in Philadelphia, but our people confirmed it's him. He's the one who set up the ambush, who sold out your location." The name meant nothing to Sarah, but she watched Dante's face change, saw the cold fury that she'd only glimpsed before settle over his features like a mask. "Are you certain?" Dante asked, his voice deadly quiet. "Absolutely. And boss, there's something else. He's been talking, spreading stories about you going soft, about the twins making you vulnerable. There are families listening, people who think maybe it's time for new leadership." Dante was quiet for a long moment, his eyes finding Sarah's across the yard. She saw him make a decision, saw the exact moment when the man who played with his children and helped with bedtime stories became someone else entirely. "Handle it," Dante said finally. "All of it. Make sure everyone understands that rumors of my weakness have been greatly exaggerated. What about Torino? Bring him to me. Alive. I want to look him in the eye when I finish this." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the summer breeze. She'd known this moment would come eventually, the moment when the violence that funded their peaceful life would demand its due. But knowing something intellectually and experiencing it were different things entirely. That evening, after the twins were asleep, Dante found Sarah in their bedroom, staring out the window at the darkening woods. "I have to go back to New York," he said without preamble. "This situation with Giovanni, it can't wait. And it can't be handled remotely." "How long?" Sarah asked, not turning around. "A few days. Maybe a week. Rico will stay here with you and the twins. And there are other people watching the house, people you'll never see, but who will make sure you're safe." Sarah finally turned to face him. "What happens if you don't come back?" It was a question she'd never asked before, though it had lived in her mind since the day she'd chosen this life. "Then Rico will take care of you," Dante said simply. "All of you. You'll have enough money to disappear, to start over anywhere you want. The twins will be provided for. You'll finish medical school. You'll be safe. That's not what I'm asking." Dante moved to her, cupping her face in his hands. "I will come back," he said fiercely. "I have too much to lose now to be careless. But if something happens, if the worst-case scenario becomes reality, you take the twins and you run. You don't look back. You don't try to avenge me. You don't get caught up in the war that would follow. You disappear, and you build a life that Isabella would be proud of for her children." Sarah felt tears burning her eyes. Promise me you'll be careful. I promise I'll do everything in my power to come home to you." It wasn't the same thing, and they both knew it. Dante left before dawn the next morning, kissing Sarah goodbye in the gray pre-dawn light, whispering promises against her hair that they both hoped he could keep. Rico moved into the guest room, a quiet presence who somehow managed to make the house feel both more secure and more empty at the same time. The days passed slowly. Sarah maintained their routines, studying while the twins napped, playing with them in the backyard, reading them bedtime stories that Dante usually handled. But every sound made her jump. Every phone call sent her heart racing. Rico was polite but distant, clearly uncomfortable with the domestic aspects of his protection duty, but grimly efficient at everything else. On the fourth day, Sarah's phone rang at 3 a.m. She was awake immediately, fear flooding her system as she saw Dante's number on the caller ID. "Sarah," his voice was rough, exhausted, but alive. "Are you okay?" she breathed. "I'm okay. It's done. Giovanni won't be a problem anymore, and everyone who needs to understand my position does. I'm coming home tomorrow." Sarah felt relief so intense it made her dizzy. "The twins. Tell me about the twins," Dante said, and Sarah could hear the smile in his voice despite everything. "Luca learned to say airplane. He points at the sky every time he hears one. Gianna has been carrying around that stuffed elephant you got her, won't go anywhere without it. They miss their papa. Their papa misses them too. Misses all of you. Come home," Sarah whispered. "Already on my way." When Dante returned the next evening, Sarah ran to him in a way that probably wasn't dignified but felt entirely necessary. He caught her in his arms, spinning her around in the front hallway while the twins shrieked with delight and demanded their own hugs. That night, after the children were asleep, Sarah and Dante held each other in their bed and talked about everything and nothing, reaffirming the connection that distance and danger had tested but not broken. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Sarah's life. Dante's handling of the Giovanni situation had solidified his position and earned him a measure of peace from his rivals. The constant tension that had shadowed their early months in Connecticut eased somewhat, though Sarah knew it would never disappear entirely. She finished her second year of medical school with honors, passed her board examinations, and began making plans for the clinical rotations that would complete her degree. The twins celebrated their second birthday with a party in their backyard, complete with a bouncy house that Luca refused to leave and a chocolate cake that Gianna wore more than she ate. Sarah watched Dante help his son navigate the slide and thought about how far they'd all come from that rainy night in Brooklyn when she'd found a bleeding stranger in an alley. But it was in late fall, as the Connecticut leaves turned brilliant colors and the twins outgrew another round of clothes, that Sarah made a discovery that would test their carefully constructed happiness in ways none of them had anticipated. She was cleaning out old files from Dante's home office, a task she'd volunteered for to help him organize years of accumulated paperwork, when she found the folder marked with Isabella's name. Sarah had never seen any of Isabella's personal effects beyond the photo in Dante's wallet, had never asked about the woman who had loved Dante before her, who had given him the children that had become the center of Sarah's world. The folder contained medical records, treatment summaries, and correspondence between Dante and various specialists. Sarah told herself to close it, to respect the privacy of a woman who couldn't speak for herself, but something in the medical terminology caught her trained eye. Isabella Romano hadn't died of cancer, as Dante had told her. She died from complications during emergency surgery following a car accident. An accident that the police report, also included in the folder, suggested might not have been accidental at all. Sarah sat in Dante's office, surrounded by evidence that the man she loved had lied to her about something fundamental, and tried to understand why. The police report mentioned witnesses who claimed Isabella's car had been forced off the road by another vehicle. There were notes suggesting that the accident had been a message, a warning directed at Dante from rivals who had wanted to hurt him in the most personal way possible. Isabella hadn't been a victim of disease. She'd been murdered because she'd had the misfortune to fall in love with a dangerous man, just like Sarah had. That evening, after the twins were asleep, Sarah confronted Dante with what she'd found. She laid the folder on the kitchen table between them like evidence in a trial, watching his face carefully as he realized what she'd discovered. "You lied to me," Sarah said simply. Dante looked at the papers, then at her, his expression unreadable. "Yes. Why?" Because the truth would have sent you running. Because I needed you to stay, and I knew that if you understood what loving me had cost Isabella, what it could cost you, you'd take the twins and disappear. Sarah felt anger building in her chest, hot and sharp. So you decided for me. You decided what I could and couldn't handle. I decided to protect you from knowledge that would only bring you pain. That wasn't your choice to make, Sarah snapped. Isabella's death, the way she died, that's something I had a right to know. If I'm going to raise her children, if I'm going to build a life with you, I need to know what that really means. Dante stood up, moving to the window, his shoulders tense. You know what it means, Sarah? You've known since the day you found me. This life comes with risks. People get hurt. People die. The specifics don't change that reality. The specifics change everything, Sarah said, her voice rising. Isabella didn't get sick and die despite your best efforts to save her. She was murdered because of who you are, because your enemies knew that hurting her would hurt you. That's not a medical tragedy, Dante. That's a war crime. And what would you have done differently if you'd known from the beginning? Dante asked, turning to face her. Would you have loved the twins less? Would you have walked away from medical school? Would you have refused to come to Connecticut? Sarah opened her mouth to answer, then closed it. The truth was, she didn't know. She wanted to say that she would have made the same choices, that knowing the full truth wouldn't have changed anything. But she couldn't be certain, and they both knew it. I would have had all the information, Sarah said finally. I would have made my choices with my eyes fully open. Your eyes were open enough, Dante said quietly. You saw what mattered. You saw two babies who needed someone to love them. You saw a man who was trying to be better than what he'd been born into. The rest is just details. Details that got Isabella killed. Details that could get you killed too, Dante said, his voice harsh with something that might have been fear. Do you think I don't know that? Do you think I don't wake up every morning terrified that my choices will put you in danger? That some enemy will decide the best way to hurt me is to hurt my family? Then why? Sarah asked, her anger suddenly replaced by exhaustion. Why build something you know you might lose? Why ask me to love you and the twins when you know what that could cost? Dante moved to her, taking her hands in his eyes intense. Because the alternative is living in fear. Because Isabella wouldn't want her children raised by a man too afraid to love them properly. Because you walked into my life and gave me something worth protecting, and I'd rather fight for it than live without it. Sarah studied his face, seeing the truth there, the fear and the determination and the love that had motivated his deception. She understood why he'd lied, even as she wished he hadn't. She understood the impossible position he was in, loving people in a world where love made you vulnerable. No more lies, Sarah said finally. Whatever comes next, whatever dangers we face, I want to know about them. I want to be prepared. No more lies, Dante agreed. But Sarah, you need to understand what you're asking. Full transparency means knowing things that will keep you awake at night. It means understanding exactly how violent my world can be, exactly what I'm capable of when protecting this family requires it. I'm asking anyway. Dante nodded slowly. Then you'll have it. All of it. Over the following weeks, Dante kept his promise. He explained the structure of his organization, the alliances and rivalries that shaped their world, the specific threats that existed and the precautions they took against them. Sarah learned about the legitimate businesses that provided cover for illegal operations, about the money laundering and protection rackets that funded their comfortable life. She learned about Dante's role as an enforcer, about the violence he'd committed and ordered, about the men who feared him and the few who dared to challenge him. It was a lot to absorb, and some nights Sarah did lie awake thinking about the blood on the money that paid for the twins' clothes and her medical school tuition. But she also slept better knowing the truth, understanding the real shape of their world instead of trying to navigate based on half-truths and assumptions. The knowledge changed her in subtle ways. She became more observant, more aware of their surroundings, more careful about routines and patterns. When they went to the grocery store, Sarah found herself noting exits and watching for people who seemed to be paying too much attention to their family. When friends from her online medical program suggested meeting in person, Sarah politely declined, understanding now why maintaining their isolation was important. But the knowledge didn't change the fundamental truth of their life together. Lucas still needed help brushing his teeth and demanded 3 bedtime stories every night. Gianna still fell asleep in Sarah's lap during afternoon study sessions and woke up cranky from every nap. Dante still brought Sarah coffee in bed every morning and helped quiz her before exams. They were still a family, just one that existed in the shadows of a dangerous world. As winter settled over Connecticut and Sarah entered the final phase of her medical training, she realized that the life she'd built was both more fragile and more resilient than she'd imagined. More fragile because it could be destroyed by forces beyond their control, more resilient because it was built on love and commitment that had already survived tests that would have broken weaker bonds. On Christmas morning, as she watched Dante help the twins open presents under the tree they'd decorated together, Sarah felt a peace she'd never expected to find. This wasn't the safe, predictable life she'd once imagined for herself. It was better. It was real. It was hers. When Luca pulled her down onto the floor to help him build a tower from his new blocks, Sarah caught Dante watching them with an expression of such complete happiness that it took her breath away. "No regrets?" he asked, echoing the question he'd posed months earlier. Sarah looked around their living room, at the chaos of wrapping paper and new toys, at Gianna attempting to put a bow on the cat's head, at the life they'd built from an impossible beginning. "Not a single one," she said, and meant it with every part of her heart. Outside, snow began to fall on their protected corner of the world, and Sarah Collins Romano settled deeper into the life she'd chosen, the family she'd found, and the love story that had indeed begun in darkness but had found its way to light.